The cold autumn air bit through Eleanor's thin dress as she stood at the center of the stone circle. Around her, 20 Omegas received the sacred mark of fertility, their faces glowing with hope. But when Elder Mira reached Eleanor, the bowl of red ochre was pulled back as if from a plague. "The moon goddess does not waste her favor on a hollow vessel," the elder hissed, her voice loud enough for the entire pack to hear. "Barren, cursed, a drain on our resources." As the crowd's pity turned to sharp-edged disdain, Eleanor clutched her mother's silver pendant, the weight of her uselessness finally breaking her spirit. The scent of burning sage usually brought Eleanor a sense of peace, but today it felt like the smoke of a funeral pyre. She was 23, an age where most Omegas in the Stonehaven pack were already nursing their first or second pups. In a society that valued life above all else, to be an Omega who could not bear children was to be a ghost among the living. She stood perfectly still as the ritual concluded. The other girls, now marked with the vibrant red streak across their foreheads, were being embraced by their families. Laughter and joyous tears filled the clearing. Eleanor, however, stood in a vacuum of silence. Even the wind seemed to divert its path to avoid her. She was the pack's primary healer, a role she had taken on with a quiet, desperate ferocity. If she could not give the pack life from her body, she would dedicate every waking moment to preserving the lives already there. She spent her days in the damp corners of the forest, gathering willow bark and feverfew, her hands permanently stained with the green of crushed herbs. Yet, as she moved to leave the circle, she saw the way the mothers pulled their children closer, as if her curse were contagious. "Eleanor," a soft voice called. It was Lisa, her only friend. Lisa's forehead bore the red mark, but her eyes were filled with a genuine, painful empathy. "I'm fine, Lisa," Eleanor said, before the pity could settle. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Go to the feast. You deserve to celebrate." "It isn't fair," Lisa whispered, her hand reaching out but hesitating. "The healers, they could be wrong. You have so much light in you." "The healers have checked me every year since I came of age," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "The goddess has decided. I am a healer of others, never a mother of my own. That is the balance." As Eleanor turned to walk toward her small cottage on the outskirts of the village, a sudden, heavy silence fell over the entire clearing. It wasn't the silence of respect, but of primal, bone-deep fear. At the edge of the clearing, shadowed by the ancient, gnarled limbs of a great oak, stood a figure that seemed to pull the very light from the sky. He was broad-shouldered, draped in a heavy cloak of charcoal wool that caught the silver of the emerging moon. King Raphael Blackstone. The Alpha King did not visit minor packs like Stonehaven. He was a myth made of muscle and amber eyes, the ruler of the 7 territories, a man whose bloodline was said to be descended directly from the first wolf. Rumors said he was looking for a mate, a queen to secure the throne after the tragic passing of his first wife. He didn't move, he didn't speak, but his gaze, sharp as a hunter's blade, wasn't on the fertile Omegas or the proud Alphas of the Council. His eyes were locked onto Eleanor. Eleanor felt a strange prickling at the base of her neck. For a moment, the world around her vanished. The smell of the sage, the whispers of the pack, the coldness of the earth. It all faded. There was only the scent of pine, earth, and a wild, electric power that made her Omega instincts scream in a way she had never felt before. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. She quickly lowered her head, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Why is he looking at me?" she wondered, her fingers trembling against her pendant. "I'm the broken one, the one they discard." She didn't look back as she hurried away, but she felt those amber eyes following her until she disappeared into the safety of the trees. That night, the feast in the great hall was loud. Eleanor could hear the music from her cottage. Instead of joining, she spent the hours grinding poultices for a young beta boy who had fallen from a tree the day before. Her selfless work was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. Midway through the night, a frantic knock came at her door. It was a young mother, her face pale. "Eleanor, please. My daughter. She's choking. The elder says it's a punishment, but please." Without a word, Eleanor grabbed her kit. She didn't care that this mother had been one of the loudest to call her cursed earlier that day. To Eleanor, a life was a life. She ran to the village center, ignoring the stares of the partygoers. In a small house, a toddler was turning blue. The pack elders stood back, whispering about bad omens and the moon's will. Eleanor pushed past them, her movements calm and precise. She used a small, curved silver tool to clear the obstruction, then breathed life into the girl's lungs until the child let out a sharp, healthy cry. The mother wept, clutching Eleanor's hands. "Thank you. Thank you." Eleanor simply nodded, her heart aching. As she stepped out of the house into the cool night air to catch her breath, she realized she wasn't alone. Leaning against the fence, just a few yards away, was King Raphael. "A healer who saves those who despise her," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "That is a rare kind of strength." Eleanor froze. She didn't curtsy. She was too stunned. "It is my duty, Your Majesty. Life is precious, even if the goddess didn't grant me the ability to create it." Raphael moved closer, the moonlight catching the gold flecks in his eyes. He stopped just inches from her, and the intensity of his presence was overwhelming. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with a hunger that terrified her. "What if I told you," he whispered, reaching out to touch the silver pendant at her throat, "that the goddess has a very different plan for you than your elders do?" The contact of his fingers against the skin of her neck sent a jolt through Eleanor so powerful that her knees buckled. It wasn't just a spark. It felt like a dormant fire within her soul had suddenly been doused in gasoline. For the first time in her life, the coldness she had felt inside her womb felt warm. She pulled back, gasping, her eyes wide with confusion and a sudden, inexplicable fear. I am Barren, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't mock me." "I never mock the truth, Eleanor Stone," he said, his expression turning solemn. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, obsidian-black seed. "Plant this. Tonight. Water it with a drop of your blood, and tell me tomorrow if you still believe you are empty." He placed the seed in her palm, his hand lingering over hers. Then, as silently as a shadow, he turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Eleanor standing in the moonlight, her hand burning and her world tilted on its axis. She looked down at the seed, then at the great hall, where her pack celebrated without her. The emotional turning point hit her with the force of a tidal wave. For the first time, someone hadn't seen a hollow vessel. They had seen her. But as the warmth in her belly flickered again, she felt a terrifying premonition. Was this a gift, or the beginning of a transformation that would cost her everything? The walk back to her cottage felt like a dream through a thick fog. Eleanor clutched the obsidian seed so tightly that its sharp edges pressed into her palm. Her mind was a storm of contradictions. The healers, men and women who had studied the ancient texts for decades, had been unanimous. Her womb was a frozen garden, incapable of holding the spark of life. Yet, the Alpha King's touch had felt like a spring thaw, a violent and beautiful awakening. Inside her quiet home, surrounded by dried bundles of lavender and jars of crushed roots, Eleanor felt the weight of her choice. To plant this seed was to invite hope, and hope was the most dangerous medicine a broken soul could take. She found a small clay pot, filling it with the rich black soil she kept for her most delicate medicinal herbs. Her hands shook as she placed the seed in the center. Then, taking a small silver needle she used for stitching wounds, she pricked the tip of her finger. A single crimson bead of blood welled up. "If this is a trick," she whispered to the empty room, "let it end now. But if there is light left for me, please." The blood fell, soaking into the earth directly above the seed. For a long minute, nothing happened. Eleanor exhaled, a bitter laugh bubbling in her throat. She was a fool. She was a Barren Omega who had let a few kind words from a powerful man cloud her judgment. She turned to wash her hands, but a soft, rhythmic thumping sound stopped her. It wasn't a sound from outside. It was coming from the pot. Eleanor watched, her breath hitching as the soil began to heave. Within seconds, a tiny, translucent shoot broke the surface. It wasn't green. It was a shimmering, metallic silver, as if it were made of liquid moonlight. It didn't just grow, it unfurled, 2 perfect leaves expanding like the wings of a moth. As it grew, the warmth in Eleanor's abdomen returned, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the plant's movements. She stumbled back, hitting her workbench. It was impossible. No natural plant germinated in seconds. This was moon magic, the ancient lost art of the lunar omegas, a lineage thought to have been extinguished during the Great War centuries ago. Fear, cold and sharp, replaced the warmth. If the elders saw this, they wouldn't see a miracle. They would see a threat. The Stonehaven pack was traditional, bordering on superstitious. Anything they couldn't explain was labeled a curse. "I have to hide it," she murmured. This was her first mistake. Instead of seeking the king, whose protection was her only real shield, her years of being treated as a pariah had taught her to hide her value. She moved the pot to the shadows beneath her bed, covering it with a heavy cloth. She tried to convince herself that if she ignored it, the strange energy in her body would dissipate. But the moon had other plans. The next morning, Eleanor was woken not by the sun, but by a frantic pounding on her door. It was Lisa again, but this time, her face was gaunt, her eyes red from weeping. "Eleanor, come quickly. It's Elder Mira." She collapsed after the feast. "The other healers, they can't stop the shaking. They say her spirit is being torn." Eleanor didn't hesitate. Her selflessness was her compass. She grabbed her bag and followed Lisa to the elder's residence. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and failure. The other pack healers stood back, their faces grim. Elder Mira lay on her cot, her body racking with violent tremors, her skin an unnatural bruised purple. "Stay back, Barren One," one of the male healers hissed. "This is a spiritual blight. Your presence will only sour the room." Eleanor ignored him. She stepped to the bed, placing her hand on Mira's forehead. The moment she touched the elder, a vision flashed before Eleanor's eyes. A tangle of dark, thorny vines wrapping around the elder's heart. It wasn't a disease. It was an energy imbalance, a soul frost brought on by years of bitterness. Without thinking, Eleanor closed her eyes. She reached deep into that new, warm reservoir of light she had felt the night before. She didn't use herbs. She simply let the light flow from her palms into the elder's skin. The effect was instantaneous. The tremor stopped. The purple hue faded into a healthy pink. Elder Mira let out a long, shuddering breath and fell into a peaceful sleep. The room went silent. The other healers stared at Eleanor's hands, which were still faintly glowing with a silver aura. What did you do?" the lead healer whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and accusation. I helped her, Eleanor said, stepping back, suddenly aware of the danger. That wasn't healing, the man shouted, his fear turning into aggression. That was sorcery. You've been hiding this, Eleanor. You're not just Barren, you're a witch. You've brought a darkness into this pack. No, please, I only wanted to save her, Eleanor pleaded. But the crowd in the room was already murmuring, the word witch spreading like wildfire. She turned and ran. She ran back to her cottage, her heart pounding against her ribs. She needed to get the plant. She needed to get her mother's pendant and flee before the council decided her fate. When she burst into her home, she gasped. The heavy cloth she had used to cover the plant had been shredded. In the center of the room, the silver sprout had grown into a small, glowing bush, its leaves singing a faint, melodic hum that vibrated in Eleanor's very bones. Eleanor Stone. The voice came from the doorway. It wasn't the angry healers. It was Commander Thorne, the head of the Alpha King's Royal Guard. Behind him stood 4 soldiers in black and silver armor. Thorne looked at the glowing plant, then at Eleanor, his expression unreadable but stern. The king was right about you, Thorne said, and the pack is right to be afraid. But for very different reasons. Am I under arrest? Eleanor asked, her voice a mere whisper. You are under the king's protection, Thorne replied, stepping into the room. But the elders have already called for a trial by fire. They believe your curse has turned into a plague. If you stay here, they will kill you before the sun sets. I can't just leave, Eleanor said, looking around her small home. I have patients. I have people who need me. They are the ones holding the torches, Eleanor, Thorne said softly, a flash of pity in his eyes. The king is waiting. We leave for the capital now. As the guards began to pack her few belongings, Eleanor reached out and touched one of the silver leaves of the plant. A jolt of pure, maternal, fiercely protective energy surged through her. It wasn't just a plant anymore. It felt like a part of her. She carefully lifted the pot, cradling it against her chest. As she was led out of her cottage, she saw the villagers gathered at a distance. They weren't cheering. They were throwing stones at her door, their faces twisted in a mixture of fear and hatred. Even some of the children she had healed were hiding behind their mother's skirts. Then, she saw Lisa. Her friend stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her face, holding a small bundle of food. She didn't say a word, but she nodded, a silent goodbye. Eleanor was ushered into a black carriage marked with the royal seal. As the door closed, sealing her away from the only life she had ever known, she felt a sharp, sudden cramp in her lower abdomen. It wasn't a cramp of pain. It was a flutter. A tiny, distinct movement that felt like 2 small hearts, beating in a rhythm she had been told she would never hear. She looked down at the silver plant in her lap, then at her own reflection in the darkened glass of the carriage. The Barren Omega was gone. In her place was something she didn't yet understand. But as the carriage began to move toward the capital, she realized with a start that she wasn't just carrying a plant. She was carrying the future of a kingdom, and the weight of it was both terrifying and holy. The journey to the capital was a blur of shifting landscapes and rising anxiety. For 3 days, the royal carriage swept through territories Eleanor had only heard of in travelers' tales. She watched through the window as the rugged forests of Stonehaven gave way to golden plains and eventually to the breathtaking architecture of Lunaris. But inside the carriage, a different journey was taking place. The silver plant, which she had named the Moonbriar, grew with an almost aggressive vitality. Its vines now curled around the interior of the carriage, and its hum had become a constant, soothing lullaby that seemed to ease the strange, heavy warmth in Eleanor's womb. Commander Thorne sat opposite her, his eyes often lingering on the plant, with a mix of reverence and wariness. "You're very quiet, Eleanor," he remarked on the second evening. "I've spent my life being told I am a mistake of nature, Commander," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "Now, I am being whisked away by the King's Guard because I grew a plant and healed an elder. I am trying to find where Eleanor ends, and this sorcery begins." Thorn leaned forward, his weathered face softening. "In the capital, we don't call it sorcery. We call it heritage. You've been taught that you're a broken vessel. But what if the vessel wasn't broken? What if it was simply designed for a different kind of wine? I don't understand riddles, Commander. You will soon. The king is not a man of whims. He has searched the 7 territories for years, not for a wife, but for a specific signature of power. He felt yours the moment he entered your pack lands." As they approached the city gates, Eleanor gasped. Lunaris was a city of white stone and glass that seemed to catch the twilight and hold it. At its heart sat the Moonstone Palace, its spires reaching up like frozen lightning. Upon arrival, Eleanor was not thrown into a dungeon, as she had half feared. Instead, she was led to a suite of rooms in the royal wing. The walls were draped in silks, the color of a winter sky, and the balcony overlooked a garden of rare, night-blooming flowers. "Lady Rosalie will attend to you," Thorn said, bowing slightly before departing. Lady Rosalie was a tall, elegant beta woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to read Eleanor's soul. She didn't bow, but she took Eleanor's hands with a warmth that felt like a mother's touch. "You are exhausted, child," Rosalie said, "and you are confused. Let us start with the truth." She led Eleanor to a tall, silver-rimmed mirror. "Look at yourself, not with the eyes of your pack, but with the eyes of your ancestors." Eleanor looked. She saw her pale hair, her tired eyes, and her simple, travel-worn dress. But then, Rosalie lit a candle made of pale blue wax. As the light hit Eleanor's reflection, she saw it. A faint, ethereal shimmer beneath her skin, like moonlight reflected on water. "You were told you were Barren because the healers of your pack used beta and alpha methods to measure you," Rosalie explained. "They looked for a spark of common fire. But you are a lunar omega. Your fire is not red, it is silver. Your body refused to conceive because it was waiting for a mate whose power matched your own. A common alpha would have been extinguished by your womb." Eleanor's breath hitched. "A lunar omega? But they were hunted. They are gone." "They went into hiding," Rosalie whispered, "to protect the bloodline. Your mother knew. That pendant you wear isn't just silver, it's a dampening stone. It was meant to hide your scent until you were strong enough to survive the revelation." Eleanor touched the moon-shaped pendant. Her mother's last words, "Remember that light always returns," finally made sense. Her mother hadn't been talking about the sun. She had been talking about the lineage. "And the movement I feel?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Rosalie smiled, a look of profound joy crossing her face. She knelt and placed a hand gently on Eleanor's stomach. "The Alpha King is the descendant of the first wolf. His power is the sun to your moon. The moment he touched you in that clearing, the soul frost melted." "But it's only been days," Eleanor protested. "How can I feel anything?" "Lunar pregnancies do not follow the laws of man, Eleanor. They follow the phases of the moon. You are not just carrying a child, you are carrying a prophecy." Rosalie stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out an ancient, vellum-bound tome. She flipped to a page illustrated with a silver wolf and a woman crowned in stars. "When the rejected vessel drinks from the king's cup, the silver briar shall bloom. 2 hearts shall beat where none were found, and the 7 territories shall be bound." Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. Twins? You're saying I'm carrying twins? The prophecy is clear. One child of the sun, one child of the moon. They are the balance the world has lost. The weight of it was too much. Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness. She wasn't just Eleanor the healer anymore. She was a piece of a cosmic puzzle, a tool of destiny. But amidst the grandiosity of the prophecy, a very human fear took hold. "Does he know?" she asked. "Does King Raphael know about the babies?" "He suspects," Rosalie said. "But the final proof must come tonight, at the full moon ceremony. He has called the nobles of all 7 territories to witness your presentation." "I can't," Eleanor whispered. "They'll hate me. They'll call me a freak, just like my pack did." "Let them," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. King Raphael stood there, having shed his heavy traveling cloak. He was dressed in a simple black tunic that emphasized his powerful frame. He looked at Eleanor, not as a king looks at a subject, but as a man looks at his entire world. He walked toward her, and Lady Rosalie quietly slipped out of the room. "I didn't choose you because of a prophecy, Eleanor," Raphael said, stopping just a foot away. The air between them hummed with that familiar electric tension. "I chose you because when I saw you saving that child in the village, I saw a queen who cared more for her people than for her own pride. I saw a heart that was full, even when the world told her she was empty." He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist before he hesitated. Eleanor took his hand and placed it firmly against her stomach. The reaction was violent and beautiful. The moon briar in its pot across the room suddenly burst into brilliant silver flowers. A golden light flared from Raphael's skin, meeting the silver shimmer of Eleanor's. Under his palm, Eleanor felt it again. Not a flutter this time, but a strong, undeniable kick. 2 distinct movements, like 2 small flames flickering in the dark. Raphael's eyes widened, and for the first time, she saw a tear track through the gold flecks in his amber gaze. "My sons," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that transcended crowns and kingdoms. But as they stood in that moment of pure domestic peace, a horn sounded from the palace courtyard. It was a sharp, discordant note, the signal of a formal challenge. "Your Majesty!" Commander Thorne's voice came through the door, urgent and strained. "The High Council has arrived. They have heard the rumors of the Barren one in the royal wing. They are demanding a purity trial before the ceremony. They claim you are being enchanted by a dark Omega." Raphael's face hardened, the tender father vanishing and the fierce king returning. He looked at Eleanor, his grip on her hand tightening protectively. "They want to prove you are empty, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low growl. "They want to take you from me before the moon rises." Eleanor looked at the silver flowers blooming across the room, then at the man who had seen her worth when she had none. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a new, fierce maternal instinct was rising, a silver fire that refused to be put out. "Let them try," she said. The council chamber was a place of shadows and cold, unyielding stone. Unlike the rest of the palace, which seemed to embrace the light, this room was designed to intimidate. High above, narrow windows allowed only slivers of the gray afternoon sky to pierce the gloom. In the center sat the High Council, 12 alphas from the most powerful packs in the territories, their faces etched with the rigid dogmas of 1,000 years. At their head sat Chancellor Malphus, a man whose hair was as white as bone and whose eyes were 2 pits of icy suspicion. To his left stood Lady Victoria, the Alpha's daughter from the northern tundra. She was draped in crimson silks and white fox fur, her beauty sharp and cold as a glacier. "King Raphael," Malphus began, his voice echoing like stones grinding together. "You bring a girl from a minor pack into the royal wing. You bypass the noble houses, and you do so based on Rumors of a lost lineage? Raphael stood beside Eleanor, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. It is not a rumor, Chancellor. Eleanor Stone is the lunar Omega spoken of in the archives. She has already awakened the Moonbriar. Lady Victoria let out a sharp, melodic laugh that didn't reach her eyes. A plant, Your Majesty? Any hedge witch with a bit of forest magic can grow a weed. But to be a lunar Omega, to be the mate of the Alpha King, that requires a purity of spirit that a barren commoner simply cannot possess. She stepped toward Eleanor, her gaze raking over Eleanor's simple dress. Look at her. She smells of dried herbs and common earth. There is no silver in her scent, only the stench of a failed body trying to cling to a crown. Eleanor flinched. The words bit into the old wounds of Stonehaven. She felt the twins stir, a sudden, sharp pulse of heat in her core. They were reacting to the hostility. She realized she had to protect them. She had to stay calm, or their power might erupt prematurely, confirming the Council's fears of dark magic. I do not seek a crown, Lady Victoria, Eleanor said, her voice trembling but brave. I only seek to understand the truth of what I am. Then let the Moonstone decide, Malthus declared. In the center of the room stood an ancient pedestal, holding a basin of black obsidian. Within it sat a raw, unpolished moonstone, the size of a heart. It was said that the stone could sense the lunar spark. If a true lunar descendant touched the water, the stone would glow with the light of the full moon. If they were a fraud, the water would turn to ink. Raphael leaned toward Eleanor. You don't have to do this. I can dismiss them. No, Eleanor whispered. If I don't do this, they will never stop hunting me. They will think you are under a spell. I have to show them. This was Eleanor's mistake. She thought that by playing their game, she could win their respect. She didn't realize that the Council hadn't come to find the truth. They had come to manufacture a lie. She stepped toward the basin. The air around the obsidian grew cold. She reached out her hand, but as she did, she felt a sudden, terrifying surge from within. The twins weren't just pulses of heat anymore. They felt like two suns burning beneath her skin. Their energy was vast, wild, and completely untrained. If I let this all out, she thought, I'll destroy the room. I'll scare them. They'll think I'm a monster. In a moment of panic, Eleanor did the only thing a healer knew how to do. She suppressed the pain. She clamped down on her own energy, pulling it deep into herself, trying to offer only a tiny, manageable sliver of her light to the stone. She dipped her fingers into the water. The room held its breath. Raphael leaned forward, his amber eyes searching. The water did not turn to ink, but the moonstone did not glow. It remained a dull, lifeless gray. A few bubbles rose to the surface, and a faint, pathetic glimmer flickered for a second, before dying out. Silence fell over the chamber, heavy and suffocating. Is that it? Lady Victoria sneered, her face twisting into a mask of triumph. A spark no brighter than a firefly? This is your lunar queen, Raphael. She is exactly what the healer said she was. A hollow vessel with a few parlor tricks. The stone reacted, Raphael said, his voice dangerously low. You saw it. I saw a girl with enough stolen magic to trick a rock, but not enough to prove a lineage, Malthus stated, rising to his feet. King Raphael, the purity trial has failed. By the laws of the High Council, this woman is a threat to the throne. She must be stripped of her protections and banished to the gray wastes. I will not banish her, Raphael roared, the alpha in him rising, his shadow stretching across the walls. Then you risk a civil war, Malthus countered. The other pacts will not follow a king who keeps a dark enchantress as a concubine. If she is truly the one, let her prove it tonight at the ceremony, under the gaze of the full moon, before all the people. But until then, she stays in the silent cells. No. Raphael reached for Eleanor. But Malphus waved a hand. 2 council guards, alphas of immense strength, stepped between them. Because it was a formal trial, even the king was bound by the ancient protocols he had sworn to uphold. To break them now would be to forfeit his crown and any chance of protecting Eleanor in the long run. Eleanor looked at Raphael, her heart breaking. She saw the agony in his eyes, the struggle between the man who loved her and the king who had to save his people. "It's all right, Raphael," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "I'll go. I'm not afraid." But she was. As the guards took her arms, she felt the twins go quiet. The warmth had vanished, replaced by a terrifying, hollow cold. Her mistake, her attempt to hide her power, had silenced the very thing that made her whole. As she was led down into the lightless depths of the palace, she caught one last glimpse of Lady Victoria. The noblewoman wasn't looking at the king. She was looking at Eleanor's stomach with a knowing, predatory glint in her eyes. She knows, Eleanor realized with a jolt of horror. She doesn't care if I'm a lunar omega. She knows I'm pregnant, and she wants the children gone. The heavy iron door of the silent cell slammed shut, plunging Eleanor into absolute darkness. She sank to the stone floor, clutching her belly. "Please," she whispered into the dark. "Don't leave me now. Wake up. Please, wake up." But there was no flutter, no kick, only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the distant mocking drip of water in the deep, cold silence of the earth. The silent cells were aptly named. They were carved from a deep vein of nullstone, a rare mineral that acted as a sponge for any spiritual or magical energy. To a normal person, it was merely a cold, dark room. To a lunar omega, whose very soul was wired to the vibrations of the moon and the earth, it was like being buried alive in a tomb of static. Eleanor sat in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest. The hollow cold she had felt earlier had deepened into a terrifying numbness. She pressed her palms against her stomach, begging for a sign. A single kick, a tiny ripple of warmth, but there was nothing. The null stone had severed the connection. "Please," she whispered, her voice sounding flat and dead in the small space. "I'm sorry I tried to hide you. I was only trying to keep us safe." Hours bled into one another. Without the moon or the sun to guide her, time became a fluid, agonizing weight. She thought of Raphael. Was he standing on a balcony right now, looking at the rising moon? Was he fighting the council, or had the weight of his crown finally forced him to accept their verdict? The sound of a heavy bolt sliding back startled her. The door creaked open, admitting a sliver of torchlight that stung her eyes. A tall silhouette stood in the doorway, draped in crimson and white. Lady Victoria. The noblewoman stepped into the cell, holding a silk handkerchief to her nose to block the scent of damp earth. Behind her, a single guard stood watch, his face hidden in the shadows. "So, this is where the prophecy comes to die," Victoria said, her voice smooth and venomous. "In a hole, surrounded by the silence she deserves." Eleanor didn't move. "If you've come to gloat, you're wasting your time. I have nothing left for you to take." "Oh, Eleanor, you have so much more to lose than just your dignity," Victoria said, crouching down so her face was level with Eleanor's. In the flickering light, her eyes looked like chips of frozen flint. "I saw the way you held your stomach in the chamber. I grew up in a house of alphas. I know the scent of a brewing storm. You aren't just a witch, you're a mother." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. "I am Barren, remember? The council said so." "The council sees what it wants to see. But I see a threat to the bloodline I was born to join," Victoria hissed. She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small glass vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "This is Wolf's Bane shadow. It won't kill a grown wolf, but for an omega, and for whatever little anomalies are growing inside her. It will ensure that the Council's verdict of barrenness becomes a permanent reality. Fear, sharp and electric, finally broke through Eleanor's numbness. She tried to scramble back, but her back hit the cold stone wall. You wouldn't. The king would have your head. The king will be told you succumbed to the darkness you invited into yourself, Victoria replied. She signaled to the guard. The man stepped forward, his massive hand gripping Eleanor's shoulder, pinning her to the wall. Eleanor struggled, but the null stone had drained her strength. As Victoria moved the vial toward her lips, Eleanor felt a sudden, violent surge of rage, not for herself, but for the two small lives that Victoria sought to extinguish. No, Eleanor thought. I am a healer. I protect life. I will not let it end here. Just as the glass touched her teeth, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the very walls of the cell. It wasn't a wolf's growl. It was the sound of the earth itself groaning. The vial shattered in Victoria's hand as the floor of the cell buckled. The guard was thrown backward by an invisible force, hitting the iron door with a sickening thud. Victoria screamed, clutching her bleeding hand, as a faint silver light began to leak from the cracks in the stone floor. "What is this?" Victoria shrieked, scrambling toward the door. "The stone! The null stone is breaking!" Eleanor looked down at her hands. They weren't just glowing, they were radiating a soft, pulsing silver light that seemed to push back the very darkness of the cell. The silence was gone. In its place was a roar of white noise, the song of the moon, finally breaking through the barrier. And then she felt it. Thump, thump. Two tiny rhythmic beats. The twins hadn't been gone. They had been waiting. And now they were angry. "Leave," Eleanor said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was layered with a resonance that made the torchlight flicker and die. "Before the moon finds you." Victoria didn't wait. She grabbed the unconscious guard's collar and fled into the corridor, her panicked footsteps echoing until they faded into nothing. Eleanor sank back onto the floor, but the ground no longer felt cold. It felt like a living thing, humming beneath her. She realized then that her mistake hadn't just been suppressing her power. It was thinking that her power was something she could control with her mind. This wasn't a spell. This was nature. This was the tide, and no wall of stone could hold back the ocean forever. She spent the rest of the night in a state of wakeful meditation. The silver light around her didn't fade. It grew stronger as the moon reached its zenith outside. She could feel Raphael now. His energy was a golden thread in the distance, frayed and anxious, but still anchored to her. "I'm coming, Raphael," she thought. "Wait for the moon." As the first bells of the full moon ceremony began to toll, the heavy door of her cell opened again. This time, it wasn't an enemy. Commander Thorne stood there, his face pale and his armor scorched. "Eleanor, the palace is in an uproar. Something is happening to the gardens. The Moonbriar has overgrown the royal wing. The king has defied the council. He is calling for you to be brought to the Scepter Plaza." "Is he safe?" Eleanor asked, rising to her feet. She felt light, as if gravity had lost its hold on her. "He is fighting a war of words and wills," Thorne said, looking at her with a new kind of awe. "But the people, they have seen the silver vines. They are starting to wonder if the council lied." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to follow. "The ceremony begins in an hour. It is no longer just a presentation, Eleanor. It is a judgment. If the moon doesn't claim you tonight, the council will have their execution." Eleanor walked out of the cell, her simple dress tattered and her hair loose. She didn't look like a prisoner, and she didn't look like a simple healer. She looked like a storm wrapped in silk. As they ascended the stairs toward the surface, the tolling of the bells grew louder, vibrating in her chest. The final escalation had begun. The whole of the 7 territories was watching, and as the cool night air finally hit her face, Eleanor looked up. The moon was massive, a silver orb that dominated the sky, turning the world into a landscape of black and silver. "Let it begin," she whispered. The Scepter Plaza was a sprawling amphitheater of white marble, usually reserved for the coronation of kings. Tonight, it was a sea of thousands. Representatives from every pack in the 7 territories filled the tiers, their eyes fixed on the raised platform at the center. The air was charged with a tension so thick, it felt like the moment before a lightning strike. At the center of the platform stood the High Council, their faces grim under the cold lunar glare. Beside them, King Raphael waited. He had refused to sit on his throne. He stood at the very edge of the marble, his amber eyes scanning the dark corridor from which Eleanor would emerge. When he finally saw her, led by Commander Thorne, a visible ripple of relief passed through his frame, followed by a fierce, protective snarl that silenced the nearest nobles. Eleanor stepped into the light. She was still in her tattered dress, her feet bare against the cold marble, but as she walked, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shimmer. "Eleanor Stone," Chancellor Malphus's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the plaza. "You stand before the 7 territories to answer for the claim of your lineage." The purity trial was inconclusive. Now, under the zenith of the Mother Moon, we demand the final sign. If the moon does not claim you, you will be cast out as a pretender and a practitioner of the dark arts. Lady Victoria stood near the Chancellor, her hand bandaged, her eyes burning with a desperate, frantic hatred. She leaned in to whisper to the High Priestess, her gaze never leaving Eleanor's midsection. Raphael stepped forward, reaching for Eleanor's hand. The council guards moved to intercept, but he roared, a sound of such raw, alpha authority that they froze in their tracks. He took Eleanor's hand, and the moment their skin met, a low hum vibrated through the entire plaza. "She is my Mott," Raphael declared to the thousands. "She is your queen, and she carries the blood of the sun and the moon within her." A shocked gasp erupted from the crowd. The word pregnancy had been a rumor, but to hear the Alpha King claim it, about a woman famously known as Barren, was a scandal that bordered on heresy. "Blasphemy!" Malphus shouted. "She has bewitched you, Raphael. She uses the illusion of life to mask her rot." Eleanor looked at the Chancellor, then out at the thousands of faces, some mocking, some curious, many fearful. For a moment, she felt like the small girl in the stone circle again, waiting for a mark that would never come. But then, she felt the rhythmic, double beat of the hearts within her. They weren't afraid. They were calling. She let go of Raphael's hand and stepped to the very center of the plaza, beneath the direct path of the moon. "I was a healer in a small village," Eleanor said, her voice clear and surprisingly steady. "I spent my life believing I was empty. I was told my purpose was to preserve the lives of others because I could never create my own. I accepted that silence. I accepted that cold." She looked up at the moon, and for the first time, she didn't see a distant celestial body. She saw a mother. "But the light always returns," she whispered, echoing her mother's pendant. As the moon hit its zenith, Eleanor stopped trying to control the energy. She stopped trying to be a manageable healer. She opened the gates of her soul and let the silver tide rush out. The transformation was blinding. A pillar of pure, liquid silver light descended from the sky, striking Eleanor. Her tattered dress didn't catch fire. It began to weave itself into a gown of shimmering, ethereal gossamer that looked like starlight caught in silk. Her hair, once a pale blonde, turned into a brilliant, glowing white that flowed around her like a halo. Across the palace grounds, the Moonbriar responded. Massive silver vines surged over the walls of the plaza, bursting into thousands of glowing blossoms that filled the air with the scent of pine, earth, and ancient magic. The crowd fell into a terrified, reverent silence. "Look!" someone screamed, pointing at the center of the platform. The light around Eleanor's midsection began to shift. It wasn't just silver anymore. Two distinct spheres of light began to glow through the fabric of her gown. One was a brilliant, cool silver. The other was a warm, vibrant gold. They swirled around each other in a perfect celestial dance, a visual manifestation of the twins she carried. The energy was so potent that the High Council was forced to shield their eyes. Malphus stumbled back, his face pale with the realization that he was witnessing a miracle he could not explain away. "The Lunar Queen!" a voice cried out from the crowd. It was Lisa, Eleanor's friend, had traveled from the village, standing among the commoners. Soon, others joined in. "The Silver Wolf's mate!" Eleanor felt the power peaking. It wasn't just a display, it was a cleansing. The silver light swept across the plaza, and as it touched the people, those with ailments felt a sudden cooling relief. The bitter, the angry, and the fearful felt a moment of profound, unearned peace. But the light also sought out the shadows. It struck Lady Victoria. The noblewoman let out a strangled cry as the silver light illuminated the dark, oily residue of the wolfsbane shadow still clinging to her sleeves. The evidence of her attempted murder was laid bare for all to see, glowing like a neon brand of guilt. "No!" Victoria shrieked, clutching her face. "It's a trick! It's all a trick!" But Raphael was already moving. He didn't need a trial now. He saw the guilt on Victoria's face and the miracle in Eleanor's eyes. He stood beside his queen, his own golden aura merging with her silver one, creating a bridge of light that seemed to unite the earth and the sky. The two spheres of light, the silver and the gold, settled back into Eleanor's body, the warmth returning to her womb with a sense of completion. The blinding pillar of light faded, leaving Eleanor standing in the center of the plaza, her skin still faintly luminous, her eyes now a deep, shimmering silver. She wasn't a hollow vessel. She was the source. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, one by one, starting with Commander Thorne and the Royal Guard, the people began to kneel. Thousands of alphas, betas, and omegas lowered their heads to the woman they had called a witch only hours before. Even the council members, seeing the literal hand of the goddess, slowly sank to their knees, all except Malphus, who stood frozen in shock, and Victoria, who had collapsed in a heap of ruined silk. Eleanor turned to Raphael. The Alpha King looked at her with a reverence that surpassed his title. He didn't see a prophecy. He saw the woman who had walked through the dark to find him. "You're here," he whispered. "We're here," she corrected, her hand resting on her stomach. But as the cheers began to rise, a low, ominous rumble echoed from the mountains surrounding the capital. The revelation of a lunar queen was a beacon, and in the dark corners of the world, those who had hunted her kind for centuries were finally waking up. Eleanor felt a sharp prickle of intuition, a final warning. The battle for the throne was won, but the war for her children's future had only just begun. The silence that followed the lunar revelation was not the cold silence of the cells, but a heavy, breathless awe. Chancellor Malphus remained on his knees, his eyes fixed on the silver-white blossoms that now draped the marble pillars like a living shroud. The threat from the mountains, the ancient shadows that had once hunted the lunar omegas, seemed to retreat, rebuffed by the sheer purity of the light Eleanor had unleashed. Raphael stepped toward Malphus, his voice no longer a roar, but a calm, terrifying weight. "The goddess has spoken, Chancellor. Do you still find the vessel hollow?" Malphus bowed his head until it touched the stone. "The council was blind, Your Majesty. We sought to protect the throne from shadows and failed to see the dawn standing before us. I submit to your judgment." "Justice will be served," Raphael said, glancing at Lady Victoria, who was being led away by guards, her face a mask of broken pride. "But today is not for blood. It is for the truth." In the weeks that followed, the capital transformed. The Moonstone Palace, once a place of rigid protocols and secrets, became a sanctuary. Eleanor refused to let the council be dismantled. Instead, she demanded it be reformed. She spent her days not in the throne room, but in the palace infirmaries and the city's healing houses. She used her gift to mend what was broken. Not just bodies, but the deep-seated prejudices that had plagued the territories for generations. The most profound moment of redemption, however, came on a rainy afternoon a month before the twins were due. Commander Thorne entered Eleanor's solar, where she was tending to the silver moon briar that now filled the room with its melodic hum. "Your Majesty, a delegation has arrived from the Stonehaven Pack. They are at the outer gates, led by Elder Mira and Elder Brennan. They are asking for an audience." Eleanor felt a slight tightening in her chest, the memory of the stone circle, the sage smoke, and the hateful whisper still carried a phantom sting. She looked at her reflection in the glass. She was healthy, glowing, her silver hair braided with moon silk. She was no longer the girl they had discarded. "Let them in," she said. When the elders entered, they didn't look like the formidable judges they once were. They looked small, their clothes worn from the long journey, their faces etched with a profound, soul-deep shame. They didn't even dare to look her in the eye. They knelt at the threshold of her room. "Eleanor," Elder Brennan whispered, his voice cracking. "We have seen the silver vines reach even our distant woods. We have heard the songs of the travelers. We realized we nearly extinguished the very light that keeps our kind alive." Elder Mira stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held out a small, carved wooden box. "I was the one who called you a hollow vessel. I am the one who let the bitterness of my own age cloud my vision of the goddess's grace. We have come to ask you to return, not as a prisoner, but to heal the pack. A plague of soul frost has taken our children, and our healers are powerless." Eleanor looked at the box. Inside was a collection of rare herbs from her own garden back home, dried and preserved with care. She thought of the stones they had thrown at her door. She thought of the loneliness. "You called me cursed," Eleanor said softly. "We were the ones who were cursed," Mira replied, tears blurring her vision. "Cursed by our own fear." Raphael, standing in the shadows of the room, watched Eleanor closely. He would have supported her if she had turned them away. He would have banished the Stonehaven Pack to the edges of the world for what they did to his mate. But Eleanor walked to Elder Mira and took her weathered hands. "I am a healer," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a sincere, quiet strength. "A healer does not choose who is worthy of life. I will send my disciples with the moonbriar cuttings, and I will come myself when the twins are born. Not to rule you, but to ensure that no Omega in Stonehaven ever stands in that circle and feels empty again." The elders wept, their foreheads touching the floor in a gesture of gratitude that was more than just political. It was spiritual. It was the first bridge built in a new world. The winter gave way to a spring that the 7 territories had never seen. The land didn't just bloom, it breathed. And then, on a night when the moon and the sun seemed to hang in the sky together for one golden moment at twilight, the prophecy reached its quiet, holy conclusion. The birth was not the violent event the legends predicted. It was a calm, silver-lit affair in the royal chambers. Raphael never left her side, his hand anchored to hers as the two lives they had created entered the world. Two boys, one with the dark hair and amber eyes of his father, radiating a warmth that felt like a summer afternoon. The other with the silver hair and violet eyes of his mother, his presence as calm and deep as a mountain lake. The sun and the moon, held in the arms of a woman who had once been told she was a desert. In the final weeks of her recovery, Eleanor sat on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the city of Lunaris. The moonbriar had grown into a massive, silver-flowered tree that shaded the palace gardens, its roots intertwining with the ancient stones of the foundation. Raphael joined her, placing a cloak over her shoulders. He picked up the silver-haired babe, while Eleanor cradled the dark-haired one. They stood in silence, watching the people of the capital move through the streets below. Alphas and Omegas walking side by side, the old divisions fading like a bad dream. "They look like peace," Raphael whispered, kissing the top of his son's head. "They look like the truth," Eleanor replied. The story of the Barren Omega had become a song sung by every hearth in the 7 territories. It wasn't a song of power or of kings, but a song of a woman who was selfless enough to heal her enemies, and a man who was wise enough to see light in the dark. As the sun began to set, casting a long, golden glow over the silver blossoms of the briar, Eleanor leaned her head against Raphael's shoulder. The hollow vessel was full. The curse was a crown. And the light that her mother had promised had not just returned, it had decided to stay. The image was one of absolute stillness, the silver briar swaying in the breeze, the twin princes sleeping in the glow of the twilight, and the king and queen standing as a single shadow against the coming night, a testament to the fact that healing is always possible for those brave enough to plant a seed in the dark. Thank you for joining us for this cinematic journey through the 7 territories. Eleanor's story reminds us that our true worth is never defined by the labels others place upon us, but by the quiet strength of our own souls. If this tale of a rejected Omega's redemption and her miraculous twins touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner light. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to join our community for more emotionally rich and morally redeeming stories. We leave you now with the image of a single silver petal drifting onto a sleeping prince's cheek, a quiet, hopeful promise that no matter how long the night, the light always returns to those who wait.